Welcome back, everybody. It's Zach here, bringing you guys another fantasy football video. It's going to be going over all of the must-draft players that I am personally going into every single draft, really trying to make an effort to get on my roster. I'm going to touch on all four positions, so over 2 quarterbacks, I think 6 running backs and 6 receivers, and then 3 tight ends. So we're looking at 15 to 20 players here that I'm really making a strong effort to get on each of my rosters, and they go all throughout ADPs as well, so it's not just round 1 guys, not just late round guys either. It's going to be every player that I'm actively making an effort to get on my roster, and these are all guys that I have a really high exposure to on teams that I'm drafting right now, and I think that the guys that I'm going to look to have extremely high exposures to when we get into redraft and all that as well. So I'm super excited about all of these players. If you guys have any players that I don't mention that you feel belong in this list, let me know in the comments below. If you guys also disagree with any of these players, let me know in the comments. I love interacting with you guys there, and a lot of fun putting this video together. It's a lot of guys that I'm super excited about. I'm going to have a lot of fun talking about them, and hopefully you guys don't think I was too crazy, because I hope I'm right here, because these are a lot of guys that I'm super invested in myself as well. So yeah, going to be a lot of fun, and let's just get to it. Let's get to the first player here. So the first player that I'm actively trying to draft in most of my leagues right now is going to be Jordan Love. He's probably going to end up being my most drafted quarterback this season. And the fact of the matter is, this team is an offense that's going to be built entirely around their passing attack. They've got all the weapons they need to succeed and be elite. You've got high-end wide receivers in Christian Watson, Jaden Reed, Dontavian Wicks, Romeo Doubs. Even Bo Melton performed really well last season. You've got 2 really good tight ends in Luke Musgrave and Tucker Kraft that are also all super young. All the guys we've mentioned so far, these are extremely young players. We do expect this offense to only get better and better as this team gets older and older. And on top of that, they don't really have a whole lot of a run game. The offensive line didn't grade out too well in terms of run blocking last season, and their options in terms of guys that they can really give the ball to. You've got Josh Jacobs, who averaged 3.5 yards per carry last season. You don't want to build an offense around him. A.J. Dillon looked about as bad as you could possibly look at the running back position last season. Then you've got Marshawn Lloyd, who is an explosive player. He's a guy that I think does have quite a bit of juice, but he's got fumbling issues. None of these guys are guys that you want to center your offense around. So this is going to be a really pass-heavy spread offense, and Jordan Love, I do personally believe, is an elite NFL quarterback. So do the Packers, clearly. He's now the highest paid quarterback in the NFL, so they clearly have the same belief about him that I do. And on top of that, the defense is mediocre. They're not going to be a team that's going to shut people out very often, so this is going to be an offense that needs to score. Then on top of that, they're in a division where we can realistically expect quite a few shootouts. We know all their games with the Lions are going to be high scoring. Chicago should have an improved offense. Minnesota's got a decent offense and a bad defense. There are going to be some really high scoring games with the Packers involved, and quarterback 9 is just an absolutely awesome ADP. On top of that, Jordan Love has the easiest strength of schedule for the quarterback position this season. There are a lot of reasons to be super excited about Love this season, and I think he's going to probably flirt with a top 5 finish, and being able to get him as the quarterback 9 is certainly something that I want to take advantage of. Next, the second quarterback we'll talk about, and the last quarterback on this list for me, is going to be Kyler Murray, and I think that he does have a legitimate shot to be the quarterback 1 overall this season. He's got an elite skill position group, which I think is not something he's really had so far throughout the course of his career, but he's obviously got Marvin Harrison Jr., who we do expect to step in week 1 and be a clear alpha on this offense. And even behind him, you've got Zay Jones, Michael Wilson, Greg Dortch. They're competent, solid wide receivers behind Marvin Harrison, and then you've also got the elite Trey McBride at tight end. It's a really good position group. You can have a lot of success with an elite tight end and an elite wide receiver, and it's year 2 off his ACL injury, so we should see Kyler Murray back to full health. And even last season, having missed the first half of the year, he came back and averaged over rushing yards per game, over 30 rushing yards per game. That's a really great number. That's certainly going to project him to, flirt with that 500 to 600 rushing yard mark this season, and that would be absolutely fantastic from a fantasy standpoint. And really the big if for him is just health, but anybody can get hurt. I know Kyler Murray has dealt with injury several times over the course of his career, but I do believe that this is a great opportunity to get him at cost. He's currently being drafted as the quarterback 8 off boards. Definitely a really great value for a guy that I think is he's probably the last quarterback that's being drafted that has a real shot at being the quarterback 1 overall this season. And if he gets hurt, there's a lot of really deep positional players here. You get Jared Goff 5 or 6 picks later at the quarterback position, to Justin Herbert. Plenty of decent quarterbacks that you can get super late, so there's no reason to be too afraid of drafting an injury-prone quarterback this season, and I think that Kyler Murray is definitely going to be a really great asset this year. Next, the first running back on this list for me is going to be Jamir Gibbs, and the reason being just I think that Jamir Gibbs is probably one of, if not the most explosive running backs in the NFL. He's probably second only to Devon Achane in terms of just ability to take a run to the house at this point in their careers, and the Lions legitimately have a shot to be the number one offense in the NFL. They were near the top of the NFL last season, and on top of that, they're going to be an offense that's going to play mostly indoors. They got 14 of 17 games indoors, and we know that historically speaking, games played inside do result in a higher total over/under. You're not going to look at a whole lot of like rain or snow games that are really going to just sort of wear down the offenses, and it's especially important for a guy like Jared Goff who does struggle outdoors, but it's great for the Lions. They're not going to have to play outdoors too often this season. We know they're going to look to involve Jamir Gibbs as a pass catcher. I think there's a clear path towards him being much more involved as a receiver this season than there was last season, and he did actually outsnap David Montgomery in the back half of last season after their bye week, and I think we can only expect that role to increase a little bit more going into 2024. Montgomery, he's not going to go away. We're still going to see him get a lot of that goal line work, but we also saw Gibbs get utilized at the goal line some as well. It wasn't just a clear, they're inside the 5, David Montgomery's coming in every single time. So we know Jamir Gibbs, especially with his home run speed, he can score from outside the 20-yard line on any given play, and if he's given any sort of goal line role, I think he's got 15 touchdown upside on him over the course of the season, and you pair that with potentially 70, 80 receptions for this guy. He's got legitimate running back 1 overall upside this season, and getting him as the RB5 is something that I'm more than happy to pay right now. Next, we've got Derrick Henry, and I think people are just forgetting how good Derrick Henry is, and even was last season. I know a lot of people would look at last season and think that he was, aging out, and obviously he didn't put up the same overall numbers that we've seen over the last several years of his career, but the real issue here was just that they didn't have any supporting cast there. There was a really bad offensive line. The entire defense knew every single play. They just needed to stack the box, and if they could stop Derrick Henry, they were going to stop the Titans. And despite that, he was still second in the NFL in breakaway runs in 23. There's a lot of other ancillary metrics that sort of say Derrick Henry was still really good as well. And just imagine how many explosive runs we're going to see for Derrick Henry this season when the defense has to focus on Lamar. All those read options, you're really going to see a lot of explosive plays and home run plays out of Derrick Henry this season. And even if he can't do that, just as far as his goal line role goes, it's going to be absolutely elite. We saw Gus Edwards score 13 times last season. Derrick Henry's a much better player than him. He's got a legitimate shot to score 20 touchdowns this season, and if that happens, he's going to flirt with a top 3 finish at the running back position, and he currently goes to the RB8 off boards. I think that's a little bit too late. I think he's going to be a guy that could easily be a league winner for us, and I think people are just being a little bit silly drafting Derrick Henry outside the top 5 on an offense that's going to be super involved with him. He's not going to catch passes in Baltimore, but he hasn't ever caught passes before anyway, so he doesn't need that. He's going to have high-end volume. There's nobody else in Baltimore to really take touches away from him at the running back position, and if those touchdowns break right, which I expect them to, he's going to be an absolute monster for us this year. The third running back on this list is going to be James Cook, and I think you might be surprised if I told you that James Cook finished 3rd in the NFL at the running back position in terms of total yards from scrimmage, just behind Christian McCaffrey and Rachaad White. That's a really exciting figure to say. It's just that it shows that James Cook is one of the more talented running backs in the NFL. He's an old player. He's a guy that can really get the ball downfield. He's a guy that they're going to utilize as a pass catcher. He can really hit home runs, and he doesn't need to score 10 times to finish as a top 10 running back right now. He finishes the RB12 last season, despite only having 2 rushing touchdowns. If we were just to bump him up to 5, which I don't think is a stretch by any means, given that Josh Allen alone had 15 rushing touchdowns. We saw Latavius Murray score several times. That alone would have put him up at the RB8, and that's not assuming he gets more involved as a rusher or a pass catcher. The only competition for touches in this backfield is really Ray Davis, a late-round rookie that got brought in. Maybe he gets used near the goal line, but the fact of the matter is, like I said, we don't need James Cook to have a goal line role to be an elite player, and we do expect James Cook to be a lot more involved as a pass catcher. There's 280-plus vacated targets in Buffalo right now, so we know that historically a lot of those targets are going to go towards the running back position. I think there's a case to be made for this offense really just being run through James Cook and Dalton Kade. So if we just tack on 20 receptions to what Cook had last season, tack on 3 touchdowns, which isn't even a very high bar there, we could easily be looking at a top 5 finish for James Cook this year. And he's currently being drafted as the RB14, below where he finished last season, and the role should only expand from last season. So I think you're drafting him as floor. He's one of my favorite draft picks to make this season. I think he could definitely be a guy that we're going to look back on and think it was super obvious, and we should have drafted a lot more of him. Speaking of obvious draft picks, I think Raheem Mostert needs to be brought up here. He was the RB2 in the NFL last season, finishing 2nd among running backs in points per game. And the fact of the matter is the Dolphins are going to continue to employ 2 running backs all season long. Mostert most likely is going to command that goal line role. And it feels like 10 touchdowns is effectively a guarantee for Mostert if he can stay healthy. I'm not by any means telling you guys that Mostert's going to finish with 21 touchdowns again in 2024, but he could easily put up another 15-plus touchdown season, and that would certainly make him a top 12 running back again this year. the Dolphins have the easiest strength of schedule for running backs in the entire NFL, so there's going to be plenty of room for both running backs, De'Von Achane and Raheem Mostert, to be dominant this season, and Mostert just comes off boards as the RB27, significantly later than De'Von Achane. Makes him a really great value. He's going to be probably a high-end running back 2 for us this season as long as he's healthy, and we know what the ceiling is. It's much higher than that, and just getting him this free just makes no sense. I'm going to try and take Raheem Mostert in pretty much every league I'm in this season. And finally here, we've got Zach Moss, and I do want to hedge this one by mentioning that Chase Brown is getting a lot of hype out of camp so far. I think it's going to be really interesting to see what happens in this offense, but I just don't really see Chase Brown really commanding the goal line role in this offense. That's really what I'm most looking for in the offense. And then beyond that, Zach Moss is a much better pass blocker. I think the Bengals are really going to want to make sure that they can keep Joe Burrow upright. So I think we'll see Zach Moss utilized on third downs and passing downs quite a bit as well. So I think there's still going to be a lot of opportunity here for Zach Moss to be a high-end performer. Joe Mixon has never been an elite talent in the NFL. I've never personally watched Joe Mixon and felt like he was a very good running back. He's just okay, good enough, a professional guy that can get the job done. I think Zach Moss can fill that role pretty easily, and that role led to Joe Mixon being a top 11 running back in each of the last 3 seasons. And the reality is I want pieces of this backfield because at least one of these 2 running backs between Zach Moss or Chase Brown is going to be awesome. So if you don't like Zach Brown, wow. If you don't like Zach Moss, then I think you should be drafting Chase Brown. You should be leaving all of your drafts with at least one of these 2 running backs. It's going to be a really high-end offense. There's going to be a lot of scoring opportunity, and if Zach Moss ends up sucking, then Chase Brown is going to be a really high-end asset for us this season. So my bet is on Zach Moss here just because he's got the goal line role. He currently goes to the RB29, so he doesn't need to perform at an extremely high level to make him a great value there, but I think he does have top 15 upside at the position, maybe even a little bit better than that if things break right, and I'm super excited to get him if he's my RB3 or 4 on my roster. Moving on to the wide receiver position here, we're going to start things out with Marvin Harrison Jr., who I'm just super excited about, super excited to watch play football this season. And the reality is that Harrison's simply one of the best prospects we've seen come into the NFL, perhaps over the entire last decade. And despite that, we've seen some very elite seasons over the last several years from rookie wide receivers. Seems like it's getting more and more common for rookies to come in and be immediately acclimated to the NFL and perform at a high level. You don't have to look very far back. You can go Justin Jefferson, Jamar Chase, Puka Nacua. Marvin Harrison is the clear wide receiver 1 in a great offense. Like I mentioned earlier, Kyler Murray's back in year 2 off the ACL. There's going to be plenty of opportunity for this offense to perform at a high level. And the defense in Arizona is really bad. They're going to be a team that needs to put up a lot of points to be competitive in games. And I think that Marvin Harrison Jr. has got a legitimate shot at breaking the rookie receiving record. I think 10-plus touchdowns is also well within his range of outcomes here. And I know he's not cheap. He's currently being drafted as the wide receiver 9, but I think he's got top 5 upside and could easily flirt with a top 5 finish. I would consider taking him in that same tier of guys like Justin Jefferson, A.J. Brown, Puka Nacua. I think he belongs in that tier and potentially at the top of it. So Harrison's a guy I'm super excited about. I'm trying to get him on a lot of my leagues. And the other thing I would mention as well, just highlight it, on ESPN, he's going way later than he should be. He's definitely a guy to be targeting on ESPN, especially in auction drafts as well. Next up, we've got Jaylen Waddle, who we've already seen finish as a top 10 wide receiver. He was the wide receiver 7 in just 2022, so not too long ago, just 2 seasons. And the issue really was last year. It was just a little bit disappointing. He got a bit unlucky. He played 10% less snaps over the course of 2023 than 2022. So even though he didn't miss a lot of games, if you had Jaylen Waddle on your team, I think you would probably understand that you watched a lot of games where Waddle was on the ground hurt, coming out of the game, coming back in, not being able to play a full allotment of snaps. And it made it a really bumpy ride with Jaylen Waddle. When you're only playing 60 to 65% of the snaps, it's tough to perform at a high level in fantasy. And on top of that, he got really unlucky with touchdowns. Should have easily had a couple more than he did last season, but we know that Jaylen Waddle's got built-in top 5 upside. If Tyreek Hill were to ever go down, we know Waddle would just command an insane target share, and this offense would still manage to be good. Mike McDaniel's going to do a lot to get a lot out of this offense, and even if Tyreek Hill plays the full season, we know that Jaylen Waddle's got top 10 upside. Like I said earlier, he finishes the wide receiver 7 in 2022, and he's also got a very huge weekly ceiling. He's a guy that can put up 150 yards and 2 touchdowns in any given week, and I love having that as my wide receiver 2. So it's one of my favorite targets as a wide receiver 2 for my roster, and he goes as the wide receiver 18. He's a guy that I'm super excited to get on my roster, especially if he is my wide receiver 2. Next, we've got Tank Dell, and maybe I'm wrong here, but I really do view Tank Dell as the wide receiver 1 in Houston right now. He's got elite chemistry with C.J. Stroud and actually played outside. I mean, he wasn't in a slot on 70+% of his snaps last season. I'm bringing that up because a lot of people are worried that Tank Dell is going to be a guy that's going to play primarily inside, and that's going to mean he's a guy who doesn't really stay on the field in 2 wide receiver sets, but I think Diggs could easily end up being the guy that ends up being slotted inside. It's easier for older, aging wide receivers to perform when they're still operating out of the slot. So I think it makes a lot of sense to move Diggs into the slot, make him the wide receiver 3, and leave Tank Dell on the field for those 2 wide receiver sets. And beyond that, I think it's fair to say that Houston's going to run a lot more 3 wide receiver sets this season. But on top of that, Tank Dell is currently being drafted as the wide receiver 26, despite finishing as the wide receiver 19 as a rookie. He did that with a rookie quarterback as well. It's fair to assume Tank Dell will be better and C.J. Stroud will be better in year 2. And if we just look to the 4-game stretch where he was really breaking out prior to being injured, he averaged 24 points per game over that 4-game stretch. That's 6 points per game more than Nico Collins over that same span. He was really emerging as that clear wide receiver 1, and I think he could easily be a guy that just laps the field at the position, ends up being a guy that finishes inside the top 10, and he's got wide receiver 1 upside. He's clearly the cheapest wide receiver of the Texans as well. You got Nico Collins, who's a second-round draft pick. Diggs is an early 3rd. You can get Tank Dell in like the late 4th. So Tank Dell is definitely my preferred pick of the Texans wide receivers. I think he's probably the best player out of the 3 as well, and someone that I'm super excited to get on my roster, and being able to get him as your wide receiver 2 or 3 is really great this year. Next, we've got George Pickens. He's just clearly an elite player. He put up over 1,100 yards with Kenny Pickett as his quarterback. That should automatically put you into the Hall of Fame or something. That's really impressive work with Kenny Pickett playing quarterback the way he did last season. On top of that, Russ still has an elite deep ball. We know that's going to play right into the strengths of George Pickens, who's a really talented deep ball contested catch kind of player. And Deontay Johnson is gone as well. I think we could see a situation here where George Pickens flirts with a high 20% target percentage. 30% is potentially in the range of outcomes for him. And now we've got new touchdown upside. We saw that the Steelers as an entire offense had 13 passing touchdowns last season. Russ alone had 26 last season. So we're going to see a lot more touchdown production out of the passing game in Pittsburgh this season. That could easily make George Pickens a top 15 player this season, and he's currently being drafted as the wide receiver 27. So that's just way too low for a guy that's this talented, has this much upside, and is a clear wide receiver 1, and what should be a much better offense this season. And the last wide receiver we'll talk about here, actually second to last, is going to be Deontay Johnson. And speaking of players with no target competition, Deontay Johnson is clearly in line for a massive workload in 2024. Dave Canales is going to get the most out of this offense. He's done a great job over each of the last 2 years, getting the most out of Geno Smith and then Baker Mayfield in Tampa. I think he's going to do the same thing again with Bryce Young, and there really isn't any reason to be worried about target competition here in Carolina. Deontay Johnson has been clearly the guy that Dave Canales has been very vocal about wanting to run this offense through. And then you've got guys like Xavier Legette, who I'm not a believer in. I think he's going to be a bust. Adam Thielen was the wide receiver 25 last season, and he's by no means the same player he once was. He's entering his age 34 season, so not expecting a whole lot to happen with Adam Thielen next season. You got Jonathan Mingo. He's effectively a bust at this point. Deontay's going to command a massive target share in an offense that's going to need to throw the ball quite a bit because they're not going to be a super competitive team. I think that a top 20 finish is legitimately in play for Deontay Johnson here, and he could potentially even flirt with the NFL lead in targets and receptions this year. I don't think touchdown upside is necessarily going to be there. This isn't going to be a great team, but he could certainly PPR his way to a really great season, and his ADP of wide receiver 41 is just way too low. And the last receiver we'll talk about here is going to be Ladd McConkey, and I will hedge this one with the recent news that Justin Herbert's dealing with a plantar fasciitis injury. Sounds like he's just going to spend 2 weeks in a boot, get worked back into things, and be ready for week 1. So I'm not worried about that yet, but if Herbert ended up being slated to miss extended time, if he was going to miss like 4 weeks during the regular season, I'd be a little bit more concerned about McConkey here. But regardless, McConkey's the clear wide receiver 1 in camp so far, and he's actually just a really good player. The offense in Los Angeles is going to provide value. Justin Herbert's an elite quarterback. He's going to put up some good numbers, even on limited passing volume this season. And there's just no way that this entire wide receiver core ends up being useless. Quentin Johnson, the reports out of training camp are absolutely brutal. It sounds like he's not going to really emerge into year 2 here. And we know what kind of player Joshua Palmer is at this point. He's not going to be a guy who's going to command a very huge target share. He's just a good wide receiver too. So give me all of Ladd McConkey this season as the wide receiver 44 off boards. I think he could flirt with a top 24 finish and especially come on strong in the back half of the season. So I love getting that kind of player on my roster. Next, we've got the first tight end on this list, and it's going to be Trey McBride, who I've said all offseason I do believe is the most talented tight end in the NFL at this point in his career. And he's also the clear number 2 target in an elite offense. And even more so, I think there is a chance that maybe he and Marvin Harrison just end up being like 1A, 1B. I think they could both command target shares in the high 20%. And this could easily just be a great year 3 breakout for Trey McBride. I think he's got a great shot to finish as the tight end 1 overall, and he's currently being drafted as the tight end 4. So I love the value of him over guys like Sam Laporta and Travis Kelce, who you had picked 2 rounds earlier. I think the upside's the same. He's a younger ascending player. He's more talented than those 2 at this point, and I'm super excited to see what's going to happen with McBride this season. Next, we've got Dalton Kade, who's probably the last tight end on the board that I think has a legitimate shot to finish as the tight end 1 overall. Like I said earlier, there are 280 plus vacated targets in Buffalo this season, so it seems reasonable that this offense is going to have to run through the two best players that are still remaining from their roster last season in Dalton Kade and James Cook. The Bills are also likely going to run a lot more two tight end sets this season. I think we're going to see a lot of Dawson Knox and Dalton Kade on the field at the same time. That makes me not really worried about Knox being involved. I think we're still going to see a really high snap share and target share for Dalton Kade this season, and he's just an elite player. He had one of the best rookie seasons of all time for tight ends last year. Kind of got overshadowed, obviously, by what Sam Laporta did, but he goes as the tight end 5 off boards right now, and I really do just love being the last team in my draft to get a top 5 tight end. Dalton Cade's a great opportunity to do that. You can get him in like the 5th or 6th round sometimes. He's a guy that I'm really happy to get on my roster, and again, if he finishes the tight end 1 this season, I won't be shocked at all. He's that kind of player in that kind of offense. And the last tight end we'll talk about here is going to be David Njoku, who isn't quite as great as the other guys currently being drafted in the top 5, just because the situation isn't necessarily as fantastic as it is for those top 5 players. But as the tight end 9 off boards, I think it's really fair to be super excited about getting David Njoku on your roster. He should be heavily featured in this Browns offense. I think there's a case to be made for him to end up being the number 1 target. I'd still bet on that being Amari Cooper, but David Njoku did show last season that he can be a very critical part to this offense, and they'll be silly if they don't involve him at a high level again this season. On top of that, the Browns will be near the top of the NFL this season in terms of pass rate and plays per game. So there's going to be just a really large pie to go around for this offense, and David Njoku should get a big chunk of that. And if you just pair that with the raw athleticism we saw from David Njoku, understanding that he really did put up a top 3 stretch at the tight end position over the back half of last season, it's fair to say David Njoku has top 5 upside at the position again this season. We don't need Deshaun Watson to be great. We just need him to be as good as Joe Flacco was last season, which shouldn't be that high of a bar. I like to think that a guy they're paying $50 million a year can perform as well as a 39-year-old guy that came in off the street. So really excited to see what Njoku can do this season. I think he's one of the most talented players at the tight end position in the NFL. It's just all going to come down to situation and whether or not he gets used right. But as tight end 9 off boards, I really love that value. I'll definitely be taking a lot of him if I miss out on those top 5. So that'll do it for all the players that I'm absolutely trying to target in all of my drafts this season. Those are guys that I'm super excited about and really do think are going to be difference makers and really provide value for you across each of those positions. So super excited about each of those players. If you guys have any disagreements or any of that, let me know in the comments. Any players you feel I left out, let me know in the comments as well. Up next, I'll be going over some guys that I think are going to bust at each position, so that should be a fun video to go over. There will continue to be 4 videos a week throughout the course of the rest of the offseason, so make sure you're subscribed to the channel so you don't miss any of those. Beyond that, I'll re-emphasize that my draft kit, it's available on my website. It'll be linked in the comments or in the video description below. It's free for you guys. It has pretty much every single player that I'm super excited about. A deep dive on each of them is a little blurb about each of those players. We've got busts, sleepers, values, all sorts of information in there. It's a 20-page document. It took a while kind of to make, so hopefully you guys like that as well. My rankings and projections and all that, along with auction values, are linked in the same website as well, so feel free to use those. Again, they're free for you guys, so I highly recommend you use them. Then on top of that, we will be doing a listener league again this season. There are going to be 10 spots available because we've got myself and the champion from last season. So if you do want to be in the listener league, let me know in the comments below. Send me an email if you want to. I'll be reactivating the league sometime this weekend, and then we'll probably start sending out invitations slowly, and then we'll get a draft scheduled for sometime near the end of August, early September. But it's going to be a lot of fun. Super excited to do all this again with you guys, and we got football coming back here really soon. We're really going to get into preseason next week. It's going to be a lot of fun. So appreciate all you guys, and I'll catch you with the next one. Peace. Thank you guys for watching. If you haven't already, please be sure to subscribe to the channel, like the video, check out these other videos here if you haven't. If you want more content, please feel free to follow me on Twitter at RealSteelFFB. I'll be more active on there as the season goes on. Thanks. Catch you later.